Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the rough draft of my sermon as it is now. If you want to see the final edition, you can go to the church YouTube channel, which the link is below. Not too long ago, I began running across this word, and it was a word, the word cuck was used to insult people, and it was from the Old English cuckold. And I really didn't know what either of these words meant, so, you've got the internet, you've got dictionaries, so look things up. And cuckold is a noun, and it's an archaic noun. And it's the husband of an adulteress in regard to an object of derision. And it's actually comes from of a man make another man a cuckold by having sexual relationships with his wife. And cuck then is short for cuckold, and it actually comes from the Old French cuckoo, which is derived from watching cuckoo birds, because one of the things that cuckoo birds do is they don't build their own nests. What they do is that they sneak their eggs into the nests of other birds, and they have other birds do all the work while the other work caring for their young. And so actually, if you go back and follow the trace of these words, you find some interesting things, and even learn a little bit of interesting biology about cuckoo birds, because cuckoo birds are not just known for their clocks, they're also known for getting other people, for being freeloaders. They get other people to sit on the eggs of their young. Now, there's a lot that goes on into this emotionally. Let's call it pair bonding possessiveness, and it comes out actually in quite a few ways, both in human community and the animal kingdom. There are jealous lovers, there are jealous husbands, there are jealous wives. Something happens when we bond with someone, and some of our identity gets wrapped up in there, and there are hardly anything's more painful than betrayal. But you'll see interesting things in animals. For example, people look at nature and say, oh, nature is how we ought to be. Well, female chips, if they get a chance, will kill the young of their female rivals, which is not a very happy thing. And just do a little research in terms of the data on child abuse rates, where there's a step parent in the home, or where there's a live-in lover in the home. If you are the child of someone and you're living with an unrelated adult, the odds are that there's probably quite a bit more abuse. You might even notice this comes through in old stories and fairy tales. And Disney, of course, likes to rob fairy tales, and maybe they're cuckoos of their own. But they have, you have Cinderella and the evil stepmother. And this is, this stuff doesn't just come out of thin air. There's biological, there's historical, there's sociological reasons for all of this. Now, we're going to talk about the book of Hosea, but it falls within the context of the Bible. And the Bible, what the Bible really is a very big story, and the Bible tries to orient and contextualize us to the story of the world. Well, God makes the world good, and the man and the woman decide it isn't quite good enough. And they can improve upon it by taking it their own way, and that turns out to be a disastrous thing. And then what are God's options to do with the people? Maybe annihilate them, get rid of them, or lobotomize them, take away their agency and their capacity to rebel? Well, under human management, you begin to see what people are capable of. You have Cain and Abel, and the first sons, one kills the other. You have Lamech and his wife and his wives, where he brags to his wives about killing a young man because he offended him. And Lamech was going to teach the world how big and bad he was by showing them how he could take life. And then the first few chapters of Genesis, you have the story of technological advancement, and it gives power, and power is used for bloodshed and domination. Our first parent says, nobody tells us what to do, and we pass this on to our children, who progressively use more and more violent means to, in fact, not only tell other people what to do, but to use violence to enforce it on their lives. Now, this goes all the way through into Abraham and then into Israel. And in many ways, in the book of Genesis, there's some fresh starts. So the flood is kind of a wiping things out, and God saves the best man in the world and his family, but very quickly it degenerates back into where it was. Cursings come pretty early, and then you have full-blown rebellion at Babel. And then Abraham is another effort. God will make a people for his own. But right there in the Abraham story, you have the question, can Abraham learn to trust? Can Abraham actually believe God and trust in him for his well-being, or will Abraham continue to try to simply make a way for himself? And this theme gets generated on through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, and then into Israel. And then in the law, you have these laws and promises. And God says, okay, if you think carrots and sticks will help you, all right, so reward for good behavior, punishment for bad behavior. Well, how did that go? How did we handle that? Can we, in fact, follow through on things like that? And if we can, what does that say about us? And that very much contextualizes us in the book of Hosea. Now, Hosea kind of runs the reverse of Plato's Republic. If you know anything about Plato's Republic, you know that Plato is trying to discover what is a just human being. And so he says, well, human beings are kind of small and idiosyncratic, so if we want to find out what justice is, we should blow it up into a whole city. And in that city, we'll be able to see justice. Well, Hosea is kind of the reverse, because sometimes you lose the forest for the trees, and so how to get a handle on Israel, and in a sense, God takes the story of Israel and shrinks it down into the life of Hosea. And he shrinks it down into the life of Hosea, and he does so in a way that is very telling and very emotive and very painful, because he basically commands Hosea into a very unhappy and unhealthy marriage. And in fact, this theme of marriage and adultery will run through the prophets. Hosea is one of these, is a prophet similar to Ezekiel, where it's, and in some ways similar to Jonah, where it's not just the words that Hosea is using that illustrates to the people who God is and how God relates to them, but it's in fact Hosea's whole life. So the word of the Lord came to Hosea, son of Beri, during the reign of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and during the reign of Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. Now, what's helpful to know is that at this point in the history, in a number of sermons, we went through a lot of the history, Assyria, who is the big bad actor that we've met throughout the history books, but then we've also seen in the story of Jonah, Assyria is at this point gobbling up the kingdom north of Israel, and Assyria is also having some of its internal troubles. So what this leaves is a power vacuum, and Egypt is having some of its own dysfunction. So the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel are flourishing at this time. And Jeroboam II, who's a descendant of Jehu, he's being a very successful king, and the economy is going well, and everything seems to be going well, except it's not really following the covenant. So they're experiencing the good life, but they're experiencing the good life by violating the covenant, which seems like it doesn't fit into the carrots and sticks clause of what's happening. Now, Hosea, in fact, ministers during a very long reign, and what happens that immediately after, during these reigns all the way to Hezekiah, because that's where we notice, and Hosea is an interesting prophet because we see him both addressing the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern kingdom of Israel at the same time. That's rather unique for the prophets. But what we'll see is that Hosea will begin in some of the best of times economically, and if we're using a secular measure, and it will descend into some of the worst of times as Assyria once again becomes resurgent, and after gobbling up the kingdom of Aram just north of Israel, will begin to put pressure on both the northern kingdom and eventually destroy it, and then almost completely destroy the southern kingdom when Hezekiah is king there. And again, we've gone through some of those stories in past sermons. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, "Go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. For like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord." So Hosea is supposed to embody in his life who God is. And he is supposed to do something that probably everyone in their village would tell him not to do. Parents are usually very interested in who their children marry, and the whole village, probably seeing him going and marry Gomer, says, this is a bad move, because Gomer has a track record, and we all know how she is, and we all know this is going to end in disaster. And this is now filling in the story of, if you imagine God and these other gods of the other neighbors watching him, the other neighbors would say, it isn't very smart for God to bind himself to those people. In fact, we, looking back over the story of Genesis, might say, you should probably just erase Adam and Eve and their offspring because they're a bad bet. And you shouldn't save Noah because these human beings are a bad seed. But God is showing us something about himself in Hosea. Now, does that mean God is unwise? What aspect of God is being revealed through Hosea? So he married Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel." That's what you're going to name your kid that. Now, there's a lot of word plays that are going on in this, and Jezreel is supposed to be have a connotation of abundance, but you get the sense, as you see, for example, in Isaiah 5, that the possible abundance, as we've seen in the technological advancement between Cain, who founds a city, and all the way to Noah, the technical abundance breeds bloodshed. "And that day I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel." Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Then the Lord said to Hosea, "Call her Lo Ruhamah," which means not loved. "For I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them." And you can pay attention to the stories that we went through with Hezekiah. After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son, and the Lord said, "Call him Lo Ami," which means not my people. "For you are not my people, and I am not your God." And in fact, there seems to be a play here on even the name of God here. And so what has happened is that Gomer has produced 3 children. And God has told Hosea, "I want you to bear witness in your town to what it's like to be me. I want everyone in the town to understand how you have pained me. And now in these children, by their names, I want you to represent that I am getting out, that I am getting a divorce, that I am done with you, that I am about to bring destruction upon you, and that's going to be it." Now, what's about to come is going to confuse us. And I'm going to use this word. I'm going to use this word antinomy. Now, antinomy is kind of a funny word because, well, a lot of people don't know it. And often we'll say, well, it's kind of a synonym with paradox, a contradiction between two beliefs or conclusions that are in themselves reasonable, a paradox. But antinomy has a little different feeling from that. And again, it comes from the Greek, and it means anti-nomos, which means anti-law, but it's not really lawless. It's that a word, there are two things that we can't quite put together, and we know that they're both true, and we can understand them both, but what we can't understand is how how they can come together. And you can see, well, this has the notion of two laws. And what we're seeing, though, is that if you begin reading Hosea chapter 1 and you read it scientifically, which we almost always naturally do, we read this and we try to say, okay, I'm going to abstract a rule out to figure out what God is going to do. That God is going to destroy Israel. Yeah, God is. And in fact, if we looked back at our other sermons, we saw Israel has been destroying herself. Yes, she has. And God is basically saying, I am done with you. I'm not going to do anything anymore. Yeah, he will. But will he change his mind? Because we say, well, look, God is abandoning. God is punishing. Yeah, that's true. But is he giving up? Is he throwing in the towel? Is he just going to let all of this turn to destruction? Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called children of the living God. The people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together, and they will appoint one leader, and will come out of the land, for great will be the day of Jezreel. What's God doing here? He just finished saying, I'm done with you, I'm divorcing you, I've had it, I'm going to send you into the pit, I am going to wash my hands of you. Say to your brothers, my people, and of your sister, my loved one. You can see what he's doing. All three names are reversed. And the question is, though, this is an antinomy. How can this be done? Because God's charge against them is true. Israel's track record is bad. And there doesn't seem to be a way forward. Israel is a very bad partner. She is making God look like a cuck. God is jealous for his reputation. And again, it's in a sense, and in the Old Testament, you have a lot of passages like this where God is in a sense worried about his reputation. You can find this in the book of Job, where God is talking to the accuser, and God is in a sense defending himself before the accuser and using Job as an illustration. But what will God do? Will he be like the sons of Adam and Eve, who multiply violence to subdue and enslave his unruly wife? Because this is what people do. Jealous husbands and jealous wives often turn either to violence to try to control or abandonment. These are the options we use. Now, chapter 2 is mostly poetry, and keep that in mind. Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her remove the adulterous look from her face, and the unfaithfulness from between her breasts. Otherwise I will strip her naked, and make her as bare on the day she was born. There's a lot of connections, actually, between this and a chapter in the book of Ezekiel. I will make her like a desert, turn her into a parched land, and slay her with thirst. I will not show my love to her children, because they are the children of adultery. And you can very much hear God's heart, and this heart we can relate to, because if you've ever sat down and talked to a betrayed person, all they want to do is pour out vengeance upon the person that has broken faith with them. And here through Hosea, God, not only through his life, but now through his words, is communicating exactly how he feels, exactly what he thinks, exactly what he wants to do, and in many ways, exactly what is merited by the behavior of Israel. Their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She said, I will go after my lovers who give me my food and my water, my wool and my linen, my olive oil and my drink. Now, there's a lot of debate here as to Gomer's status, and often she's portrayed as a prostitute, and scholars greatly debate about the language, and part of the difficulty is because we have these different images that are culturally bound of what prostitution is. But the heart of this is that Gomer is getting her needs met in other places than where she should get them met. She's going after other men for the stuff, for the status, for what she can get out of them. Just like Israel is going after the other gods for what she wants from them. Therefore I will block her path with thorn bushes. You see God here, the owner of nature. I will wall her in so that she cannot find her way. And often, in fact, thorn bushes, as in the Dominican Republic, often made fences for homes. When he came to his, well, now what's going on here, I'm going to switch over here to Luke, because there's actually, these stories are in parallel, and they're in parallel with some other interesting stories. And one of the stories that this is in parallel with is, in fact, Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. Because in some ways, the strategy here of the adulterer is, I'm not going to pay your insurance anymore. I'm not going to put a roof over your head. I'm not going to feed you. You want me to feed the children of adultery? I'm not going to feed them anymore. I'm taking all the goods away, and let's see how you do. And in fact, this strategy can work, but the strategy doesn't always produce the desired effect. And you can in fact see that with the story of the prodigal son, because the son who tells the father, I want your stuff, but I don't want you, goes to a far out, far away land with his withdrawn inheritance, and he squanders it, and he loses it, and he's starving to death, and he goes and he has to feed pigs. Now, there's a lot of debate about this, especially among some of you who know my take on Luke 15. When he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. Well, actually, I'm going to clip this verse a little bit. And often when we read this, we believe that, oh, well, the son had a change of mind and he had a change of heart. And this is a nice thing to think. But a number of scholars, including Kenneth Bailey, who's done more work on this parable than just about anybody I know, actually says, well, it's not unlike someone that you kind of put into a corner and, well, they'll tell you what you want to hear, but they don't mean it. What makes you think that, the son comes to his senses, but which senses does he come to? He comes to his mercenary senses, which is what drove him out in the first place. And, well, what's your justification for this? Any scribe and Pharisee who Jesus is addressing this parable to would have very much known on the lips of the prodigal son are the words of Pharaoh, who, when the plagues come down, the Pharaoh says, I have sinned against the Lord and your God and against you. And now take away the locusts, but once the locusts are gone, guess what Pharaoh does? Therefore, I will take away my grain when it ripens and my new wine when it's ready. I will take back my wool and my linen intended to cover her naked body. So now I will expose her lewdness before the eyes of her lovers. You want to get naked with your lovers? Here you go. Naked all you want, baby. No one will take her out of my hands. They're all going to see exactly who you are, and when they see exactly who you are, they're not going to want you. And I can tell you, I've heard plenty of people in situations of marital and romantic distress say words just like these. I will stop all her celebrations, her yearly festivals, her new moons, her Sabbath days. These are all the religious things. Yeah, because, read the book of Jeremiah, because they're using them even against God. All her appointed festivals. I will ruin her vines and her fig trees, which she said were her pay for her lovers. I will make them a thicket, and wild animals will devour them. Again, this is like Jonah's storm coming up. This is chaos coming and devouring the ungodly order that, as we saw in Babel, they put up. I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baals. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but me she forgot. And this is it. God says, just as any lover, I showed myself to you. I exposed my intimacy to you. I gave you all of me, and you looked at me and said, it's not enough. This is just like Adam and Eve. This is what we do. But then it changes. Therefore, I'm going to allure her. She's like, what? Kick her to the curb. Don't be a cuck. I'm going to lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. Therefore, I will give her back her vineyards and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the days when she came out of Egypt. Remember when we were first together, honey? Remember how sweet it was? It can be that way again. Will you turn to me not because you want my stuff? Will you turn to me with your heart? Will you turn to me because you love me? In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband and will no longer call me my master. What? Is the relationship changing? Is it one of love and not just fear and power and dominion? I will remember the names of the Baals on her lips. When I'm intimate with you, my mind won't flash to the other lovers you were with. No longer will their names be invoked. I'm not going to, in the course of a fight, bring up that you slept with other people. I'm going to put it out of my mind, and I will never use it in a fight again. What is this about? Well, we are Gomer. We, like the prodigal son and like Adam and Eve, want God's stuff, but we don't want him. We flirt with God, but lie with everyone and everything else that catches our eye. Oops, banging around my computer. We flirt with God, but have sex with everyone and everything else that catches our eye. We naturally only turn to God when we are in trouble and our resources are exhausted. And then we say, like the prodigal son, Pharaoh's duplicitous speech. We still want God, and we don't. We still want God's stuff. We still want the power. We still want the things that catch our eye, but we don't want his heart. Now, what's interesting is that the book ends, or the chapter 2 ends, quite a bit more book to go. Chapter 2 ends with a bunch of sayings about in that day, and we looked at that a little bit last week in Obadiah. In fact, it comes up in Joel, it comes up in Isaiah. It's a refrain that comes up in the prophets. And in that day is Judgment Day. But Judgment Day isn't just one day way off into the future. There's a pre-echo of it. And in fact, there are many, many, many Judgment Days. Judgment Days for individual nations. Judgment Days for individual people. Judgment Days for individual chapters in your life. Judgment Days for idols in your life. That day is the day of the Lord's appearing, when he comes and he shows up, and we have to choose. And this is the sense of apocalypse, which is revealing. This is the day of the Lord, is the day of his presence. This is the storm in Jonah. And this is the coming of the bridegroom. It's in that day, finally, when Gomer sees Hosea. And Hosea imagines someday Gomer will not say, honey, can you spare some money? But say, honey, I love you. You've given me all of you. I will give you all of me. This is what marriage is about. This is what relationships are about. This is what our relationship with God is about. Well, that day comes. And what's so interesting in the Gospel of Matthew is the Gospel of Matthew uses all of these images of the day of the Lord in the crucifixion. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the land. That's the storm in Jonah. That's the chaos of God undoing corrupt order. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? The anger and the vengeance of this spurned lover, of this towards this woman who has made this man a cuck, and the reputation of how many people comes furiously upon Jesus. But the day of the Lord is a two-edged thing. The judgment falls upon Jesus, and Jesus accepts it willingly so that his bride can be won. His bride can be not only free of the lovers who have abused her, but free of the desire to go after these lovers, free of the desire to betray her master who becomes her husband. Jesus cried out in a loud voice, and he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs were opened. Bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life, and they came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. This is the day of the Lord. This is the day of judgment, and it's a day of wonder. When the centurion and those with him were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he is the Son of God." Well, why did they think that? Because there it was, the storm of Jonah. There it was, the anger of a spurred lover poured out upon a man, but poured out upon an innocent man who took it voluntarily to save his bride. All of those stories converge into that moment when judgment is done and justice is done. And the Gomers that are us now look upon him with new eyes. In that day I will make a covenant for them, with the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky and the creatures that move along the ground. This is new creation. Bow and sword and battle I will abolish from the land, so that all may lie down in safety. This is life in our husband's home, the way we've always wanted it. I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice. That's what Plato was looking for. In love and compassion. I will betroth you in faithfulness, and you will acknowledge the Lord. In that day I will respond, declares the Lord. I will respond to the skies, and they will respond to the earth. Heaven and earth will now meet and work together productively. There will be a new heavens and a new earth in that day. And the earth will respond to the grain and the new wine and the olive oil, and they will respond to Jezreel, Jezreel's true name, which is planting and abundance. I will plant her for myself in the land, and I will show my love to the one I called not my loved one. And I will say to those called not my people, you are my people, and they will say, you are my God. How will you respond? Will you still value God only for what you get out of him? Will you reciprocate the love he showed by taking the justice and giving you grace? Will you show that grace to God by showing it to the Gomers in your life? Because you know they're out there, and you can name them, and you know what it's like. And when you hear God raging, you can identify with that. But what does God do? He gives his Son so that Gomers can become wives, and the lovers in their deepest hearts they've always wanted to be.